So good morning, everybody. Or should I say ciao, the only Italian word that I'm going to use during this session. I'm from Italy. I'm Claudio Brotto. I'm a SharePoint MVP, and I do SharePoint development on a regular basis with my company, Green Team, that is based in Bologna. Okay. Here you have the link to my blog, my email address, and so on if you want to write me something. So the title of this session is SharePoint Debugging and Troubleshooting. I know that, well, it's 9 a.m. in the morning. Maybe it will be a better topic to talk about something new and amazing in SharePoint 2010, like, I don't know, managed metadata or BCS. But we are going to talk about this guy here. Have you ever seen this? Who has never seen this one? Nobody, okay. Okay, SharePoint 2010 has a lot of new improvements. Also in the UI, you can see this. It's much better than before. And I remember back in 2004, 2005, the first time that I saw a guy like this, I had more or less this face here, and said, okay, unknown error, what's happening? Then, of course, an expert told me, well, no problem, go take a look at the log files. Yeah, fine. Have you ever seen the log files in SharePoint? Yeah, great source of information. So I turned this face here. Oh my God. Then afterwards, I opened that log file and tried to get, okay, what's the exact time of my issue? I dig around, and finally, I found something like this. Much better now. Unknown SP request error. So my face turned like this one. Oh, why on earth am I doing SharePoint development? Okay, why on earth? More seriously, okay, we are going to talk about those guys there, the SharePoint logs. Logging, first of all, because if you have information about the issues, of course, it's much easier to troubleshoot and debug maybe. So we can read the logs. We, of course, are how many developers inside here? Everybody. How many of you is an IT pro guy? 1, 2, okay. As developers, we, of course, have a rich API that we can use in order to log information for the solution that we develop and make those information end up in the log files. This is useful because for the 2 IT pro guys that are in the room, there is a place where you can go and look at the stuff we have made, at the stuff that had issues, of course. Then we're going to try to identify, to have suggestions so that we can easily identify issues. It's not easy most of the time. And at the end, we're going to show how we can debug with a real debugger SharePoint application. So a very short introduction about SharePoint logging. I get that many of you know that in the central administration there is a monitoring session, okay? You can click there and you have some configuration settings by which you can tune the SharePoint logging system. This is a huge improvement if you compare this with what you had in SharePoint 2007, because, for example, you have a very fine-grained configuration of the event levels that you want to be logged in the log file or the NT event viewer. So you have categories and subcategories. You can, for example, boost a login level, so have a much verbose information for, I don't know, search, then try to reproduce the issue, and then turn back with the default levels. And this is fine. Then another configuration settings that you have is the log files location. How many of you do have log files in a place that is different from C program files, common files. Oh. Why? Yeah, good idea. Because, of course, the C drive, the system drive, is usually not so big, and log files are huge files. Suggestion, remember that if you change this setting, and you maybe are going to add a new server to your farm, the log file location, for example, e-logs, should exist on that new server. If it doesn't, you may have any kind of issues. Maybe you do not even are able to run the configuration wizard and add the new server to the farm. Okay, so small tip. Now, you configure those guys, how you read them. They are log files, of course, you read with Notepad. Notepad is fine because you have Notepad in every single Windows box since the very first version of the operating system. But try to open a huge log file with Notepad. Huge, I mean 10 megabytes, 15 megabytes, 20 megabytes. What is your experience? Bad. The file takes a lot of time to load, and maybe if you try to find some string in that file, it takes a long time. So maybe you could use other text editors. There are a lot of free text editors, much better than Notepad, Notepad++, Notepad 2, one you like. But performance is better, but they are text files. It's hard to query a text file. You could use script, of course, but it's not the tool that probably is better suited for this kind of activity. That's why there are specific tools available for free that make your querying activity much easier. One of these guys is the ULS log viewer. How many of you use? Everybody. So you are debugging experts. It's a great tool because it just reads the log files for us and keeps reading the log files for us with a timer. And we can filter. We're going to take a look at that tool later on. There is the SP trace view. There is some tools that are specifically targeted to ULS log file. Or you could use scripting. With PowerShell, in SharePoint 2010, there is a bunch of commandlets that are specifically created to query or manage, more generally, log files. For example, you can query the log files for an event that happened in the last 2 minutes that have a severity of, I don't know, exception, and that has a specific correlation ID. I'm going to see later. Another addition that I like a lot in SharePoint 2010 is the SharePoint login database. That means that, consider you have a farm made up of 2, 3, 5, 10 servers. You know that there is a Windows service on each of these servers that runs and writes information in 1, 2, 3, 10 log files. Okay, but not only log files, because you have the event viewer, you have performance counters, you have a lot of other stuff that can help you identify the health status of your farm. So this guy here is just a database with a lot of tables partitioned. So you have, I don't know, 10 tables with this exact same schema. And there are some jobs that you can configure, of course, that collect information from log files, from the event viewer, from performance counters, from, I don't know, long-running queries, and write them inside this database. And this is extremely useful because you have a central location where information is stored centrally from all servers in the farm that you can query. You can create reports on that. Another suggestion, the default is to have this database hosted in the same database SQL Server instance that hosts your farm databases, configuration DB and content DBs. So just move it elsewhere. Why? Because it's going to grow a lot. Of course, maybe you can move it to another SQL Server instance where you have a disk that is less expensive, for example. And also you can reduce the load on the main SQL Server instance. So just to show you something, this ULS viewer is the tool that I was talking about. You can query log files. The way you do this is, first option, just query the live log files. This connects to the current log file and keeps reading it. So if I do this, and of course somebody uses my SQL Server farm, I start seeing information here. Okay, this information can be filtered. So I can say, for example, just give me the information about, I don't know, this product or this category. And the information gets filtered in real time. Another option is that you connect to a log file that is not the current log file, but maybe a log file that has been saved a couple of hours ago. Then, of course, it opens the Windows Explorer. Let me choose the file, and I have the same exact kind of functionality, so filtering. So, for example, I can set notifications so that I just leave the tool running and I have a pop-up or a sound when something severe happens. Another option I was talking about is using some PowerShell scripting to query the login information. These are out-of-the-box commandlets. I did not write any code, or well, I wrote this script, if script is code. And for example, I can run this and just create a new log file. You know that log files are created according to some settings. For example, the default is that information is collected for 30 minutes and then a new log file is created. In this way, you can just say, okay, new log file, then hit F5 on your page with issues and have a very small log file with the information that it's, of course, easier to find. Or, for example, you can merge log files from the servers in the farm inside a single file that is, of course, quite big that you can use for troubleshooting, maybe with the ULS log viewer. Another guy here, another commandlet, is get sp log event. Get sp log event is fine because it just queries the login system for events that occurred maybe in the last minutes, like in this case here. So if I run this, in the very last minute, there is all that stuff there. But of course, I can filter this information, adding a minimum level, warning error, and so on, or filtering by correlation ID. I don't know if you have noticed, but the new amazing interface for the unknown error page has just a very small information at the bottom that is a GUID. That is useless for the end user, but it's useful for us because we can get it, just pass the correlation ID to this script here and have information filtered by correlation ID. What is a correlation ID? It's something that recognizes a set of events for, let me say, a page request or a running timer instance activity. Something that is marked with this correlation ID and that makes easy for us to find information about the issue. Okay. I do not show you how to query the login database because it's very easy. Just use the Management Studio or write a tool. Just an information and a suggestion to. I said that there are a lot of tables that contain login information in those DBs, but they are partitioned. So you have information split up into 1, 2, 3, 10 tables. Microsoft provided views, SQL views, that you can query and, of course, aggregate those information. This database is the only one, I think, that Microsoft says, okay, you can use it. You can query directly to that database. You do not do this with the content database, correct? How? That is, but you can query those databases here. You can drop them because they are recreated and information is collected. And in fact, there are reports, or you can, for example, use Excel services to just aggregate info into a pivot table, for example. But this is the very basic. For developers, as we are, what is available? Well, I don't know if you ever took a look at the code inside the SharePoint API, Microsoft, the SharePoint.dll, with tools like Reflector or something like that. And you can find that there is a class that is internal, that is called ULS. ULS stands for Unified Login System, which internally uses an unmanaged library written with C++ and available via COM or DLL exports that indeed writes into the log files or something like that. Of course, this class is internal. So up to the current version of SharePoint, with SharePoint 2007, in SharePoint Foundation, you had no other way to write information inside the login system, inside the log files, but using reflection against that class. You know that using reflection, you can call internal methods, private methods of classes, okay? But not a good idea for a couple of reasons. First of all, you need a lot of rights to do this, okay? Because this is an operation that requires high privileges. Then, nobody can assure you that with the next version, with the next service pack deployment, that class does not change its signature. It's internal. You cannot say, oh, my code is broken now. No, it's internal. They can do whatever they like. Microsoft can do whatever they like. So there was another way to do this, another way to write a log file that was using, once again, unmanaged libraries and using platform invoke against them. Platform invoke is just a way to say, okay, there is this signature in an unmanaged function. I want to call that from a managed library that is my own. There are examples of this, but I'm not going to show them just because in SharePoint 2010, it's, of course, much, much easier because we have public APIs. There is a class, SP Diagnostic Service, that you can use very easily just by saying SP Diagnostic Service .local. You get an instance of the service .write trace your message and the category and a couple of parameters. Or, even better, you can develop your own diagnostic service, inheriting from another class that is SP Diagnostic Service base, that, by the way, is the base class of SP Diagnostic Service. It's not difficult. You just have to provide implementation for a method, okay? And use that class, maybe with a facade layer so that you just invoke a static property so you have a single point to query for writing to the log files. And this guy here, of course, can be integrated in custom logging solutions, which I'm going to show you. So here, I have a wonderful web part that I developed that has 4 buttons, and each of them provokes an error. Fine. This one just traps the error. Okay, this is the error. And uses the sp diagnostic service.local.writeTrace, providing the error message, of course, the error severity, and an error category. If you want to ensure that something is logged, you can, of course, run the ULS log viewer, maybe filter where category contains BPC, and see that something happened. This is my error message that gets written into the log files. Another option is do the exact same thing, but leveraging a custom diagnostic service. A custom diagnostic service is a guy like this. It is a public class that inherits from this one, that provides a static property local. So this guy is instantiated only once per application domain, and that implements this method here, provide areas, saying, okay, I am a diagnostic service that provides you a couple of, okay, 3 categories that you can use to trace messages. Plus, here I have 1, 2, 3 helper methods, which I can call from my code, for example, log info, right here, that just calls the write trace method of the base class. The final effect is here. It's a couple of lines of code less than before, because I have a helper method. And here, if I just change my filter and say product contains VPC and run this, I get this error here. Why using this guy instead of the base diagnostic service? Well, in my opinion, it's always better to have a layer of abstraction between what you do and what the base platform does. There is another small thing that you can do with the custom diagnostic service and not with the base classes, that is providing, for example, a product name that gets into the log. Before, with the base diagnostic service that I had used, the product name was unknown. Doesn't matter, okay, but 1, 2, 3 reasons. I suggest you to develop a custom diagnostic service, okay? Also because you can sometimes have an external component that you have bought or that you have to use, I don't know why, that was developed outside of SharePoint. There are a lot of user interface frameworks that provides fantastic grid views and calendars and schedulers. And sometimes you just want to drop them into a SharePoint page or just write a web part that uses those controls. In this case, what happens with logging? Because those components were not developed against SharePoint, so there is no notion at all about the SharePoint logs, of course. Sometimes these components use external logging systems. I don't know how many of you have ever used Log4net? One? Yeah. The Microsoft Enterprise Library? Okay, Log4net wins. Yeah, my favorite. It's a framework that a lot of components use indeed. And okay, Log4net has its own login API. If a component uses Log4net for login, sometimes you get this. This is, of course, an example. But right here, you click here. I have a log file written here. Why? Because that component uses log4net with a log file appender. This is specific to log4net, but just to give you an example, log4net has specific components that allows you to write info to different targets. One is a file, of course. With file this one, this logger uses this appender is the name of the component. What is the issue with a guy like this? That do you have the rights to write into that location? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe you have to grant those rights to an account or a group. My opinion is that we have the ULS login ecosystem in SharePoint. Why shouldn't we use it also for these components? That's why you can write which I show you. Okay. And refresh this. You can write a component that is specific for log4net, but it's just an adapter. A component like this. A custom appender that uses our login service. Then it's just a matter of changing a configuration file. So easy. Okay? Once this is available, you can get the same information that you had logged in a custom log file inside ULS. Okay? Plus, and I'm not going to show you this, we have another component in the SharePoint login system that is the developer dashboard. How many of you has never seen the developer dashboard? Never? I'm going to show you. Okay, the developer dashboard is a very cool addition in SharePoint 2010. It is a sort of a page-level trace that can be, let me show you, that can be enabled or disabled globally at the farm level. You can say it's always on, it's always off, it's on demand. Here, it was on demand, so I had to click on Show Me Developer Dashboard to get this information here. Which kind of information, of trace level information is displayed? Well, it's something that happened during the page life cycle. So for example, it's very small, so I just read it for you. This page took less than half a second to render. But you have more specific information because you can know that the begin request handler method took just less than 1 millisecond to render, and so on and so on and so on. So you get information of what is happening here. Also, on the right part, you get the correlation ID. You can get here what are the database queries that has been executed. And also you can click on one of those. Don't try to run those queries, but just to get information of what is happening behind the scenes. This is useful because before this guy here, the only way to get this information was using the SQL profiler, which is not the thing I like most because you have a lot of information. It's difficult to filter, at least for my experience. So this is the developer dashboard. If you want to leverage this with your custom login, you can and I show you this one. Just rerun the page, click on that button. That button just invokes a method that takes 1 second, just with the thread.sleep. But the information is written here because I am surrounding my method call with just the using new SP monitored scope. SP monitored scope is a class that you have out of the box in the SharePoint DLLs. You can create a new one, then dispose it. And once you dispose it, using a try finally block like this one, information gets recorded, for example, the time that it takes to perform this task. And this information is displayed in the developer dashboard. This is useful because you can quickly find in this way what part of your solution takes so long to execute. Maybe you have complex web parts with a lot of events, with a lot of calls to other features, other functionalities, other methods, and you can have nested information of this time. Okay? So questions so far?
Yeah. Can you use the logging API in a sandbox solution?
Not directly, unfortunately, but, and this is the most common answer to, okay, sorry, the question was, can I use the login API in a sandboxed solution? And the answer is no, but you can write a full trust proxy. You don't know if you have experience with sandboxed solutions a little bit. Sandboxed solutions can execute just a subset of the operation that you have in the server object model. Okay. Unfortunately, login APIs are not inside this subset. A workaround could be just to create a full trust proxy that is a component that has to be registered, and for this registration you need administrative rights. And once you register it, you can just invoke it from sandbox code and have this component do the logging for you. Unfortunately, it's the only way. But there are examples on the web. There is an article by Andrew Connell on MSDN that shows you something like that. Okay. So quickly, we talked about logging generally. So fine. We know how to read logs. We know how to write into log files. The issue is that SharePoint is quite complex. So, okay, I can read log files, I can write log files, but who of these components here is the cause of my issue? It's not easy to find out most often. Another way to look at that complexity is saying, okay, I have a server and I have a client and a network between and the request. But of course, if I have issues here, or if I have a throughput of 1 byte per second, something is going to be slow, probably, and this is my user. Not very happy. So in this section, I'm going to just to provide you 2 or 3 examples of what could be the troubleshooting of a specific issue. I'm not going to cover any issue that you can find, of course. I had to choose some, and one is authentication, for example. Just to show you that SharePoint is complex indeed, and sometimes when you have authentication issues, for example, who are you? Login, username and password, okay. no, username and password, okay, no, username and password, 1, 2, 3 times, and then boom, probably there is an authentication issue, but maybe it does not depend on SharePoint itself. Of course, in this situation, you have to get some information of your environment. For example, what is the authentication type? Windows authentication, Forms authentication, claim-based authentication. What are the browser settings? Are you using Internet Explorer? Your site is in a local intranet or internet zone. Of course, it changes the output. But if you have issues, my suggestion is take a look at the event viewers of both the client and the server, and the server and the server. Which server, it depends. Sometimes the domain controller itself, because that way you can spot something like this on the client. Ooh, a Kerberos error message was received. Oh my God. Kerberos. Okay, people say that Kerberos is easy. For me, it's not. I'm not an IT pro guy, but my IT pro friend says, oh yeah, it's easy. And then they spend days and days troubleshooting this kind of stuff. Sorry, not for every IT pro guy, of course, just my friends. And what good friends. So you get something like this on the client. Just look at the event viewer. Maybe you do not know what this is all about, but Kerberos error message. Then your administrator goes and look at the domain controller event viewer and find something like this. Okay, this is blah, blah, blah. Duplicate name is. So maybe start thinking, maybe I have some issues with SPNs. I register the same SPN for 2 different accounts, computer account and a user account. This is the issue indeed. But, okay, he's an IT pro guy, so he starts the network monitor and starts sniffing the traffic that is passing between the client and the server and gets the same information, but with the network monitor. This is just an example. Another example, troubleshooting SQL Server issues. Not about SharePoint once again, but the error message may be, cannot connect to the configuration database. Okay, probably there is something wrong with my SQL Server. Not with SQL Server by itself, but maybe just with the connectivity between the front-end server and the back-end server. Sometimes your site is slow. It's not easy to find out why a page takes so long to render, but of course, if your SQL Server has issues, it will slow down everything because it is the base of your data. So what you have to check in this situation, of course, the status of your SQL Server, the instance, the databases, is the connectivity running fine? Are the protocols allowed for the communication? What is the throughput of your SQL Server? How many transactions per second that are run correctly? Or maybe how many I/O bytes are written into the disk? Disk is critical in these situations. Not going to show you a demo, but you can use, of course, network tools once again, so the network monitor, but you have the SQL profile, you have a lot of tools to troubleshoot specific database issues. Also the developer dashboard, because, you can click on a query and get information on that query, and if that query takes so long, something to investigate more. Or more generally, the page is low. How do I know that the page is low? Because very, very small here, I have a running timeout. Boom. Why the page is low? Well, it depends. Where is the page low? For example, you can have a page that is served quickly. So my server gives me, the client, a response very quickly, but I start seeing in the browser this moves here, and the page takes a lot of time to be rendered correctly on the client side. Or maybe sometimes the browser does not respond, which happens probably if you have issues with some JavaScript or client components. What you can use in this situation? Well, of course, sniffers. I guess that many of you know the Fiddler tool. Everybody? Okay, fantastic tool. It's not the only one. For example, there are improvements in the browser itself. The last version of Internet Explorer, IE 9, has a couple of new tabs in the developer toolbar that allows us to sniff the network traffic and also to profile what is happening in the client when the engine of the browser renders all this stuff. These are client issues. Server, the page is 2 lines of HTML, but it takes 20 seconds to be served by the server. It's not a client here, it's the server, of course. What you have to look at in this situation, of course, maybe the server load. Well, strange, my page was fast, but now that I have 100 of users, the page is slow. Okay. So you have contentions, you have lock-in issues. Well, troubleshooting performance, in my opinion, is one of the most complex tasks. So that's why I'm going to show you a couple of tools that can help you. One, here, I have this page. Let me turn off the developer dashboard. Okay. You know about jQuery. Everybody uses jQuery. Too much. Too much because sometimes you do not know that jQuery just takes what is in the HTML and transforms it in something different. Here I have just a list of pictures, and I got this plugin that let me slide here and click here and get the big picture here. Fine. But my suggestion is run Fiddler. Just take a look at what is the HTML that you have rendered. Because if I do this, I see that there are a lot of pictures that get requested to the server and downloaded. Now, of course, I can use client cache, I can use HTTP proxies, I can put my pictures into a content delivery network, so I take the load off of my server. But if you have a slow connection and you just download 70 pictures, just to show 5 of them in a page, it's not a well-behaving page, in my opinion. That plugin is fine, but it loads all the images in the page, and then 5 are visible and 65 are hidden. Not a good idea, okay? This for the client side. For the server side, as I said before, troubleshooting performance is difficult. And this is a situation when probably you should use a tool that helps you in this kind of activity. For example, a profiler. Does any of you uses profilers for memory issues or CPU issues? Just 1, 2, 3, 4? What is a profiler? A profiler is a tool that, in a way, connects to your application as it is running and collects information about what's happening. How does a profiler do this kind of stuff? Typically using profiler APIs that are very low-level APIs available with the common language runtime and the .NET framework since the very first version. Profilers are complex tools. And there are 2, 3, 4 profilers on the market that I would suggest. I'll show you one here, that is the .trace. There are others from Redgate or SciTech. I'm going to give you a link, of course. I do not do this live, but I open a snapshot that I have saved because this takes a bit long. But the final effect is, just to give you an idea, you run the profiler, you say, okay, profile web application. What is the web application? This one. This profiler is smart, but not extremely smart, so he has to stop the services, the worker processes, start them, because it's just when a process starts that the profiler can attach its own code and inspect what is happening. So if I do this, IIS goes down and then goes up. The profiler runs the home page, or at least the page that I specified here, and starts collecting information. Once you collect information, you can save that information for inspecting it later. Example, I just open a snapshot that I saved. And it takes some time to load, of course, because in this case, I wanted to spot memory issues. So I had the web part that created a 300,000 byte array in memory, just to have an information to show you a little bit easily. So what I get here is, yes, there is a bit of memory consumption. Don't know if you can read here, but I have a list of classes in the base libraries or in my libraries, it depends. I can sort this list, of course, and I can find very easily that the byte array class consumes, yes, 300,000 megabytes, bytes, a lot of memory. What I can do with this, I can investigate further and say, for example, give me information about this guy only, and just tell me who is consuming all that memory, which thread. And it says, here is a specific thread that has allocated that memory. Let's take a look. Okay, I have a sort of call stack here, and I go down and down and down, and I say, BPC, blah, 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 use memory, waste memory. Just to show you, I have symbols here, so I get information of what is the real method call that caused the issue. And just to show you my fantastic web part, in that method there, waste memory, remember, I have code like this, great web part, the best I have ever developed. Okay? I was saying that there are a lot of other profiles, so I can give you a link, and not going to say this is the best one. This is easy to show. Okay. And just to conclude a little bit this part, when you have performance issues, it's a trouble. It's a trouble, because usually you get performance issues on a live server, on a production server. A lot of troubles. So suggest and anticipate what you can about this kind of stuff. For example, write good HTML, of course. Know the APIs that you are using. Dispose stuff that you have to dispose, but not what you do not have to dispose. And think that your application is going to scale probably if you avoid locking, if you avoid operations that prevent scaling, okay? We have logged information. We know how to troubleshoot stuff. You know, a couple of tools. But no way, at the end, we have to debug. So what debugging is? This is from Wikipedia, the source of information. A debugger is a computer program that is used to test and debug other programs. Okay. Or, this is better. It's a software tool that allows you to monitor the execution of a program, inspect the status of the memory, and so on. Or sometimes the debugger is the person that does debugging. It's Wikipedia, not me. Well, debugging is, the process is more or less the same for every application. You build your code, you run it. How you run it, you hit F5 on Visual Studio, maybe. Huh? Then you break. So you have the breakpoint, the breakpoint gets hit, and finally, that is the point where you're going to watch what is happening. Oh, okay, I found it. Then you fix the bug. Then another bug, and another bug, another fix, another fix. Well, indeed, debugging is a little bit more complex. For example, build. Yeah, build and run. Yeah. Which kind of build are you going to build? It's a debug build? Well, probably, because you want to debug. Maybe you forget about the fact that you put a debug build on a live server because you forgot about recompiling everything, and it's not fine. So sometimes, for example, I do debugging with a release build. You do debugging with a release build? Why? Well, it's not that debug allows debugging and release does not allow debugging. It's just configuration. In order to debug, you need symbols, because without symbols, when something is happening, the debugger does not know what to show you, the method name. It just shows a memory address. And maybe you have to turn off optimizations. Now, the difference between the debug and the release build by default is that optimizations in the debug build are turned off. And once something is optimized in the intermediate language, in the compiled code, the debugger has more chance to break, or I don't know, it's much more difficult to get the real information. Then you run what? Hit F5, yeah, I'm running the current project. Or maybe you just attach to a running process. Which one? Well, it depends. The W3, WP, which one? You have 5 running? I'm going to show you. Then you break. When you break, when you hit the breakpoint, you are freezing a running process. Okay? Just remember this, because maybe debugging on a real production live server is not a great idea. It's possible, maybe with remote debugging. How many of you have ever done remote debugging? Okay. I'm not going to talk about remote debugging, but it's possible. Okay, not a good idea. Then you watch stuff, and then you fix stuff. You have this guy here that is edit and continue. Great stuff. But in SharePoint, for example, edit and continue is not supported. Why? Not because it's SharePoint, because it's 64 bits platform. Not supported, edit and continue. So, is SharePoint debugging different than normal application? No, not. It's just a ASP.NET application, but a couple of things to consider. The edit and continue, and you say hit F5. Yes, you can. I remember in Las Vegas, in the SharePoint conference a couple of years ago, the introduction by Paul Andrew that showed to the audience the new fantastic stuff in SharePoint 2010 development was F5. Okay, he created a project. Which project? The visual web part, of course, the demo project, and then F5. Yes, it's an improvement, But sometimes, as I said, you have to attach to a process. You have to identify which one, which I'm going to show you. So, how to identify which is the running process that I would like to attach to? There is, I don't know if you use or have ever downloaded or tried the CKS dev extensions for SharePoint development. Todd, is it you? Ole. Todd gave me these hints yesterday. You're talking about debugging. Why don't you talk about the CKS dev extension, what you have? Yes, I will. And I'm doing now because the CKS dev extensions, you have some interesting actions here available. Just download the last version, that is the 1.2, correct?
Correct. Although there is a 2.0 coming up very soon.
So take a look at the 2.0 coming up, but just download the last version. And you have, it's very little font here, but you know that you can attach to all SharePoint all SharePoint processes generally. So IAS worker processes, the sandboxed worker process, the timer, or maybe just do the timer and so on. Okay, just by clicking here. Sometimes maybe you have a lot of worker processes running, so you want to attach to that one particularly. So how to get which is the running process that I want to attach to? I'll give you a couple of suggestions here. For example, there is a this is PowerShell. In PowerShell, you can do a lot of stuff. For example, use this module here, web administration, that lets you browse the running processes, application pools, and so on, hosted by your Internet Information Services. And, OK, just import it. And that's with a get child item. Get me all the items for application pools of this name, and then get me the worker process. Or you can use this guy here, that is a command line tool, appcmd, list worker processes. Or you can do it with WMI, or, and this is my favorite one, just start Process Explorer, that is sort of Task Manager plus, and plus, where you have your worker processes running, the process ID, maybe the identity, in this case, of the application pool. So, oh no, my web application run with SP content and attached to it. OK. This is how to attach to a running process, just a couple of hints. Then you finally do attach and start debugging. OK, I said debugging is not so different than with ASP.NET applications. I give you a couple of hints. For example, one is about, this code here. Let's take a look at it and say, OK, I have a for loop, and inside I do something, call a method. Then I would like to stop the debugger here only when the output is, 42 is the condition that you want to set. OK? How you do this? One idea is just write this code here and check the output variable. Debug write line is a base .NET framework APIs that writes in the output debug window. OK. Not a great idea, in my opinion, because you are doing something that if it is just for debugging, it should not go into production code, into a release build. Now, debug.writeLine ends up in the release build, does not end up in the release build, but this check, yes, it does. Then, you know, there is debug.assert. What does debug.assert just does? It just checks for this condition, and if this condition is false, writes a debug message. Okay, so here I'm saying, I have this method, it returns 32, then I write this. What is the issue with this code? Well, the issue is that debug.assert is not at all inside the release build. So, yes, you are not running anything, but you are not even calling this method. Maybe you want it called. Okay, caution with asserts, because the risk is that you use them, but there is some functionality that is blown away in release builds. So a better idea is, and I don't know if you have ever used them, you can put conditions on breakpoints. You know, have you ever used conditional breakpoints? Yes, somebody? Very easy. Just put a condition here, say that break when the condition is this one. Okay, that's a small tip. Specific to SharePoint, and this is the last topic I'm going to talk about, is what if I need to debug some code that is not my code, but is external code? Not specific to SharePoint, but maybe you want to debug ASP.NET code. You have some code that you think, it's running fine, but something breaks. Why? Well, because it just invokes some external APIs, and those API break. How you can identify these issues? Well, one idea could be just put a breakpoint in the SharePoint API and see what's happening. How can I put a SharePoint a breakpoint in the SharePoint API? I do not have source code. How can I do this? Well, there is a tool that probably many of you know that is called .NET Reflector, that has been bought recently by Redgate, and that has a professional version. You have to pay for it, but you get something interesting because you can create symbol files and get source files of external code, put breakpoints in them, and then inspect the execution flow. So just to show you, I just attach to a running process. I invoke the code, I hit run, and this is my code. But here, if I step into this method call, I get here. This is SharePoint code. And then here, and then here, and so on, and so on, and so on. You do not have the same debugging experience that you have with your code, because here you have optimizations, and you cannot turn them off unless you recompile stuff or do some end-gen trick not suggested. But you can follow the execution of your calls and of the SharePoint API method calls. Okay, so this is a tool that you can leverage to inspect what is happening indeed. Okay, I said this is not a free tool, but just give it a try. You have trial versions if you want to take a look at them. So, I have to skip my last demonstration that I leave on the slide for you. And just to sum it up, because I'm a bit too late, we took a look in the SharePoint logging and troubleshooting and debugging stuff today. How to read logs, how to write into log files or log locations, how we can use tools to troubleshoot issues, and at the end, how to debug stuff. I leave you with just a citation that is not from me, but from a famous guy that says, well, if with debugging you just remove bugs, when you write software, of course, programming is just writing bugs. This is the definition of development. And yes, this definition is it of my development, usually. So, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the session, and see you around.